Welcome to Wayward Writers. We are so grateful today to have the amazing Tasha Golden with us. And we are going to learn some stuff about mental health and the arts. Nikki, can you tell us about Tasha?
Absolutely. Welcome, Tasha. We are here with Dr. Tasha Golden, and she is Director of Research at the International Arts and Mind Lab at Johns Hopkins University. And she studies the profound influence of the arts on human well-being. She holds a PhD in public health. She bridges science and art to create compelling and impactful narratives. Golden is also an international consultant who's guided hundreds of organizations to improve and growth their impact. Dr. Golden is a captivating force at the crossroads of well-being, art, and transformable change. An international expert fusing art and scientific insight, Golden offers a combination of warmth, storytelling, and fresh perspectives that challenge and inspire audiences. When you go to find her, you are going to definitely want to check out her website at tashagolden.com. She has an incredibly free ebook about how the arts help your mental health, and it immediately intrigued me. And that's when I reached out to Tasha and said, will you please become a guest on our podcast here at Wayward Writers? Because yes, we writers learning about the craft, but also as you are an expert in, there's this whole other world of our mental health and how the two are partners and go hand in hand. So can you share how your career as a singer-songwriter led to your current work and PhD?
Yeah, this is definitely not the career that I thought I was signing up for. The work that I'm doing now is not what I imagined I would be doing. The job that I wanted since I was a very little girl was to be a singer-songwriter and travel around and play my songs for people. And I got to do that for a lot of years. But a couple of things happened in the middle of that work. It seemed to be going really well. Songs in film and TV. We made a record with a Grammy-winning producer, like our most ambitious project, and it seemed like things were unfolding. But a couple of things happened during that time. The first one is that I had songs that I wrote about difficult things in my life, like my family's history of domestic violence or my own history of depression. And anywhere that we went in the world, those were always the songs that people lined up after shows wanting to talk about. So people would always share their personal stories that related back to the songs. A lot of them would follow that up by saying that I'm the first person they had ever told. And I couldn't stop thinking about, okay, if I'm the first person they'd ever told, that means that they've never told a doctor or a therapist. And it means that community services and organizations that are designed to meet the needs of people like survivors or people who have mental illness weren't reaching these individuals because these folks had never told their story to anybody until they came to a music venue and told it to a relative stranger based on a song. So it made me think about, what is it about music venues, about me as a singer, or the song that made these stories speakable for the first time? And even more importantly, how do we create a bridge for that phenomenon that's happening in a music-based space? And so how do we create a bridge between that and what's not happening in clinical spaces where people find that they're not able to share those things? So this was a question that was haunting me for years as I was on the road, because this phenomenon kept happening over and over again. But then also, after a lot of years, I found that I was run into the ground with the hustle of the music industry, of the work as a full-time artist and performer. And I had a severe bout of major depression and couldn't get out of bed, let alone play a show, and had to face this question of, what is it that I'm going to do with the rest of my life? This is all that I've ever wanted to do. I don't want to do anything else. And had to explore, where is this going to go from here? So I found in that time that I was again drawing up on that question that had come up so often during my career. What was it about music? What does that mean for the rest of our lives? For the non-music and non-arts parts of our lives, what is it that's happening in the arts, and how does that get integrated? How does it apply? And I also founded a program for girls that are incarcerated, a creative writing program designed to help reduce their stress, but also to help elevate their voices in justice reform efforts. And they have been my greatest teachers, but working with them was this additional indication of the value of the arts for health, for mental health, for advocacy, for being able to make things talk aboutable, and the importance for knowing a little bit more about what is going on in arts and creative spaces, arts-based spaces, creative spaces, and how can we learn more about that in order to use it to advance human well-being, which is why I wound up where I was. It's basically like I pulled on those threads until I wound up with a PhD in public health and doing the work I'm doing now.
I'm sorry to hear about your experience with depression and also some mental health issues. And it's tough. I know a lot of our viewers do too. And I'm sure there's people that do and have never told anyone. And like you said, it was like your vulnerability in your songs and your art bred vulnerability. Someone was like, oh my gosh, she sees me. And that's something that we try to do in our writing is when we are authentic and open ourselves up to our readers, that they attach. There's a relationship that forms there. And obviously, it's a terrible thing to go through, but also, I guess the silver lining is like, look where it's brought you. And you mentioned your project, the project Uncaged, that you are helping, and that is so impressive. So I want our listeners go check out Tasha and see just the difference she's making in so many ways through the art. So I know I'm very curious. I got the free ebook I read was just awesome and very enlightening and just really intrigued me. So can you kind of share with our viewers, how can arts help our mental health?
There are a lot of different ways, and we can talk about so many different levels of it. Part of why I wrote the ebook that you're referring to is that from a public health perspective, we wind up talking about lots of layers of health. So if you imagine like concentric circles, like the maybe innermost one might be individual health, like the symptoms that you might be experiencing or the actual way that you feel, maybe even a diagnosis if you have that, the medication you're taking, et cetera. But then outside of the individual, there's interpersonal, there's your community that you live in and the institutions and resources that you have access to or don't. And then outside of that, there's policies that affect your health. Like in the US, we don't have healthcare as a human right, and other countries do have that. And that policy affects each individual's health as well, some people's more than others. And then outside of that, even we have society and culture. And you can imagine like a given person's culture would affect their health in ways just like what we're talking about. If one culture really stigmatizes mental illness, then somebody who's in that culture might be less likely to reach out for help than somebody who's in a culture where people talk freely about that. So there's lots of different layers of health. So a lot of times when people think about how do the arts affect your mental health, or how might creative writing in particular affect your mental health, a lot of times we can get focused on that individual level, which is really exciting and fun to talk about. What is the individual impact of me taking out a journal and writing something there, or me getting a canvas or getting a guitar and playing a song? What are the psychological and emotional impacts of that? And there's all kinds of research being done about that. But it's also fun for me to zoom out from that and also think about how do the arts affect these other layers as well. So when there's arts available in your community, that tends to create opportunities for people to get together socially. And we know that loneliness has really detrimental effects on mental health. The sense of isolation and being anomalous and alone has an effect on your mental health. So when you're in a community or an environment where you have access to the arts, and that might even be just virtually online, there's an intuitive way that helps human beings connect. It's part of why we evolved to make and share art at all. And then there's these ideas of what can we raise awareness about? What can we educate each other about through the arts that maybe people aren't open to hearing otherwise? So most of us have stories of reading a novel or watching a film and realizing that we're learning about an experience that we hadn't ever really paid attention to before because a character sort of embodies that experience. And we become open to ingesting that information through that art form, where we might not have opened a pamphlet about that same experience and just read some statistics about it, right? And then we've also obviously seen the arts help address, the arts have been at the forefront of social movements for hundreds of years and helping to change social norms and the things that people expect and accept as inevitable or as ingrained in human interactions. But we can actually change people's beliefs, change the way that people might colloquially say, change hearts and minds. And the arts is a big part of doing that. So when it comes to how do the arts affect mental health? There's all these layers, but definitely if we want to start at the individual, it can reduce stress. It can help you process and navigate an experience. It can help you we have research showing that just articulating and naming an emotion can take away a lot of the reactivity of it. And for all the writers out there, the more granular and specific you get about naming that emotion, the difference between, say, sad and disappointed, like the more specific you can get with the word has an even greater impact on lowering your reactivity and stress regarding the emotion that you're experiencing, and helps you just process and move through it, not get away from it. We're not trying to escape it, but move through it. And creative writing is actually a really great source for those kinds of things, because even if you don't have at hand a vocabulary to be like, here's all the emotions that I'm experiencing, you can read somebody else's work and find such a rich wealth of other people describing the human experience to be able to say, oh yeah, that's exactly what it is that I'm experiencing. And that can be such a help too.
Because sometimes we can't, even though what we do and what we love is create words and put them together. Sometimes we have no words to describe what it is that we're feeling. And I know a lot of psychiatric programs and things like that use art therapy, and not only the art maybe that you put going outside. There's adult coloring books for a reason. I love them.
Mhm.
I've always loved to color, but that is a thing. That is a real thing based on research. So, okay, so what can we do on a daily basis to take a step toward improving our mental health through our writing?
Oh, it's a beautiful question. I will lead with what you just mentioned, that there are some things, especially when we're going through it personally, we lack the words around a given experience. And so I think the first thing that I always recommend to people is to let that be okay. That phenomenon happens. That's always happened from the beginning of humans being humans, which is part of the reason why we evolved to communicate in a bunch of different ways and not just in straightforward conversation like what we're having right now. If this is all that we needed as human beings, art wouldn't exist. Apparently, we need to be able to sometimes, some people want to really move their bodies to express an emotion. Some people really need to hug somebody really tight to express emotion. There's so many different things that we need. So my first recommendation is always to let it be okay that sometimes there aren't words at the tip of your tongue for something. And creative writing offers a lot in that situation, not just as a practice of you actually sitting down and you putting your own pen to paper to write out something, but drawing on your fellow writers in the world. And the way that I mentioned earlier, you can really draw from other writers, like how did they describe their experience? What were they going through? Can I borrow some of their words? Can I borrow some of their syntax even to put myself in a different frame of mind and kind of experiment with expressing myself in a different kind of way? And then beyond that, on a daily basis, it depends on what your practice is like and what you're aiming for. For some people who are really aiming for a professional practice, it's valuable to have a daily writing. You're trying to get a certain number of words in every day or something like that. I wouldn't recommend that necessarily unless you're really into it. As the mental health component, I wouldn't ever tell somebody, here's what you need to make sure you do every single day. There's people who do that for meditation. Meditate every single day, and that's going to benefit you. Sure, there's studies that indicate that. And you could make some similar arguments for creative writing and for lots of different kinds of art forms. Do this every day for 5 minutes or something, and that's going to maybe help you. But I would say in our society, especially for people who think of themselves as writers and are trying to be quote unquote productive, the stress that we build up from having that obligation to do a certain kind of thing every day cancels out a lot of times the benefits that we would get mentally from engaging in that practice. So you have to negotiate your drive, especially for professional artists and writers out there. We all have to negotiate our drive for success, our ambition, our desire to just share who we are in our work with the world. There's a balance of that with the need psychologically for space and allowance around being a human being. We didn't evolve as cogs in a capitalistic system, right? We evolved to be creatures and we need some rest and some downtime. So in addition to saying creative writing can be useful for you, it helps to ease stress. Like you all might like this kind of fact. Like if you put things in order, say this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, sometimes that can help your brain to create a cause and effect, kind of make meaning out of a difficult thing that happened to you. And just making the meaning out of it can help you process it and move forward. So we could talk all day about the different specific ways that creative writing can be good for your mental health. But then in addition to that, you got to leave some space around it. Don't make it be another thing that you tell yourself you have to get done and do in order to be a good, healthy person or a good writer. That's not going to benefit you in the long run, probably.
When you were saying that about the everyday thing, I know I love setting goals. A lot of us do, but yeah, they can also be kind of suffocating at times. Oh, I didn't get to that today. What does that mean? Oh, does that mean I'm not succeeding? And off in this spiral. It's interesting that you said that too, because I was listening to someone about goals, like SMART goals, and they said, I try not to make daily goals. I like to make maybe weekly or monthly goals. I want to sit down and write this many days because that gives grace, right? Because life happens. And then there's some days where we just getting out of bed is a success for the day. Right?
Yeah.
Like what you're saying is that it can go both ways. And I think as artists, we do feel the both ways. It brings us joy. And then sometimes, whether it's rejection or disappointment or things like that, it can feel very, very heavy. Any recommendations that you could give of when the thing that should give us the joy and the happiness to give us not the good stuff? What is space kind of what you would recommend that we do?
It's such an important question. And I think it's ultimately going to be different for everyone. What is your cultural propensity? What drives you as a human being? What dangles in front of you as the thing that makes you want to be alive? What keeps you curious about life? But there's an interesting study for anybody who's interested. You don't have to be particularly interested in music, although I imagine that a lot of your listeners are to some degree. But there's an interesting study that turned into a book called Can Music Make You Sick? Some colleagues of mine that did research related to mental illness in the music industry and found, in the US and the UK, we're seeing statistics that people in the music industry, like over 70% of them reported having a mental illness, much higher than rates of the general public. And when they dove into this research a little bit more, what they found was that the mental illness was associated not with the activity of making music, which most people found to be helpful to them, but with the fact that it was an industry and a business that they had to hustle for and grind for, often working conditions that aren't great, often really hard expectations, the financial precarity of not knowing if you're going to be able to pay your bills. And so it was like a pretty interesting distinction between, is it the music that's making people have these effects, or is it the business of it? And so when I talk to people who are professional artists of any kind, creatives of any kind, who are making the thing that they do as an art form a part of their kind of quote unquote business, or what they might do for money or something like that, that is always going to be the hard thing to balance. First of all, when you choose to make something into a business, that thing is also a business. So it's never just the thing anymore. It's never just on its own anymore. So even writing a song for me was something that I did for my mental health, that helped my mental health. It was also, in my own experience, also wrapped up in the idea of, what does that song need to do? Like, where do I need to send it? Where do I need to record it? Who am I going to share it with? Where's it going to go? What effect is it going to have on my career? And it taints, for lack of a better word, the original action that I might have taken if I had a completely different job and I was just writing a song for my own enjoyment. Because in the latter scenario, the writing of a song or the writing of a poem or whatever is the space that you're creating. That is just an opening that you're making in your life to explore something, to express something, to maybe share something with somebody else. Whereas when it's your business, it's not just that. It's sometimes squeezed into this hustle and grind and obligation and pressure, all the things that can come with a combination of either I have to succeed in order to pay my rent, or even just I have to succeed in order to think I'm a good person and that I'm okay, I'm a success, whatever it is that we're trying to get to. I would say just a beginning initial awareness can maybe be the best place to start with, which is just that the thing that you're doing can be both of these and just inevitably is. So whereas you might think, oh, it's really good for my mental health to write, and then you go and write and it doesn't feel great for your mental health, part of that might be because that activity is two things for you. And just being aware that it is two things, and it's okay for it to be two things. You don't have to stop trying to have a career in the art form. You don't have to stop making the art, but give yourself some awareness around okay, so I might be losing some of the mental health benefits because of this one thing. What do I need to do in order to maybe still leave myself some room where I'm just an artist and it doesn't have a bearing on my career? Can I create some moments for that? Or if you can't do that as an artist, can you create those moments someplace else? So maybe art used to be that for you, but now it's going to have to be going on a walk in nature because art can't be that for you anymore because it's your career. But just have some awareness
Hmm.
so that you can take care of yourself.
Well, and I've seen a lot of writers, when it turns to the way they make money, then they do other things like they start crocheting or weaving or
Yeah.
hiking, or like you said. I think that we have to open up those spaces for us ourselves and remember that we still need that downtime.
Yeah.
So, is there anything that you have learned in your research that you wish all creators were aware of? That's a really broad question, but is there anything that we maybe haven't touched on yet that you think that our audience might need to know?
Maybe a couple different things. The first one, I did some research a few years ago looking at this question that had driven me in my entire career. Right? Like, why are people able to communicate via the arts when they can't or don't? They maybe just choose not to otherwise. And in a study that I did with young people, with girls specifically, I think the age range was like 12 to 24 or something like that. We were doing a study of their experiences and perceptions of violence. And there were like conventional quantitative surveys, and there was a creative writing component. And what we found was that the both of these components were so essential to the research. We learned things from the surveys that we couldn't have learned just from creative writing, but we learned a ton from the creative writing that we couldn't have learned from the surveys, people communicating even definitions of what they thought of as violence were different from what the surveys predicted. If you're thinking of quote unquote youth violence, what gets captured under that? We had one of our sources of creative writing was a citywide creative writing contest, and the winning poem in that contest, the poem was about miscarriage that had happened repeatedly back generations in their family. This young woman heard about a call for poetry related to violence in her community, and that's what she wrote about. For us in research around youth violence, was that on our radar as something to even think about? No, no way. And what a beautiful inroad for us to consider other avenues. And we also saw that the girls in the creative writing work, their primary concern was intimate partner violence. And in one of the cases, the parallel survey didn't ask about that form of violence at all, didn't even ask about it. So any decisions that were made by the city, for example, based on the findings of that quantitative survey, would have missed the priority concern of 50% of the population. So I think the reason I'm sharing this in response to your question is that the research, those findings didn't surprise me, but the clarity of them was stunning. I was surprised a little bit by how clear it was that there were things that people literally will not or cannot tell you outside of the arts. And sometimes that's because they won't talk about it in this kind of straightforward way. And sometimes it's because the way that somebody has asked a question does not allow the answer to emerge outside of certain bounds. Like if you're filling out a survey, you can only answer questions that are given to you, and you can only answer with the options that they've given you. Right? For creative writers, something that I would love for you to know that I've learned from research is that we evolutionarily, scientifically, biologically, psychologically need many ways to communicate about the human experience. It is a vast experience. And our ability, sometimes we are judged in our society, depending on your culture, judged by our ability to talk about what's going on with us this way. Why can't I just say what's going on with me? Like, why don't I have more confidence, or why whatever? And the question is irrelevant, or it's not irrelevant. I guess the answer to it would just be because you're a human being and our experiences just fundamentally cannot always come out this way. And I think that's inspiring to me as a creative, as an artist, because it gives me a different way to think about what I do, which is that it's not just telling a story, that's not even just connecting with other people around a story or an experience. It's also a kind of fundamental part of the human experience that we evolved to need metaphor, to need movement, to need music, sound and silence, and all these different kinds of things that help us to communicate. And that's a beautiful fact about humans. It's not a defect or an exception. That is the rule. And that is how we operate. And I'm so grateful for all the people out there that are making platforms and opportunities for that expression of the human experience that other people can benefit from so often.
It's really making me re-question my query form that people have to fill out to query me.
Oh,
Because as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, how many people don't query because they don't like the form or they don't feel
mm.
or they feel too boxed in by the format of it or the questions that are asked. It makes me want to go and change that up.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, sometimes it's just like that awareness of asking. Maybe you think about that and you go look at the form and you're like, yeah, I think it's fine though. There's nothing to change. But just what I would love is for everybody everywhere, like your doctor's intake forms when you're a new patient, what do those
Right.
look like? Why are they asked? Why are they presented a certain way? If everybody would just think about it for a moment, does this line up with the way that humans are, like when
Right.
they're human beings, and then make decisions from there? I think that would be such an advancement.
We should be writing essays about our medical history rather than filling out a form.
Yeah, there's a whole field of narrative medicine. It's called narrative medicine where people explore exactly that, the impacts of people writing narratives about their medical experience and
That
how
is
that
so
can affect
fascinating.
medical training even and things like that. It's really beautiful field of study for anybody interested. And I would also just say we just published a field guide called Arts on Prescription, a field guide for US communities. And so another thing that I would love anyone listening to know is that there's a huge effort right now. It's already happening that there are clinicians who are able to prescribe and refer their patients and their clients to experiences in the community, whether that might be a creative writing workshop, a book club, a theater, a museum, zoo, park passes. This is a big effort being led by people who are looking at how do we treat humans like whole people and how do we improve our health resources in our communities. There are these rich resources in every community that are related to arts and culture and nature that are not yet being tapped into by our typical healthcare systems. And the opportunity is right there in front of us. And there are lots of programs already initiated in the US where this is already happening. And so put together a field guide to help other people be able to do that as well. And the field guide is totally free. And if you are interested in this kind of thing, definitely go grab that because it can be, if nothing else, it might give you ideas and inspiration as a creative to see how this work is being applied to health and well-being for people.
That's huge, Tasha. And just so you all know, we will be putting all of these resources in the show notes. So don't panic.
Yeah.
We don't want that. We want everyone to be calm and happy right now. But Tasha, you just really inspired me. Just how you're talking about looking at like the forms or the medical forms and how we put things, but also asking ourselves. And I guess this goes back to journaling, but I don't know, I'm at a stage in my life, and maybe a lot of our viewers are too, where my two boys, they're teenager or coming into the last leg before they fly the nest, and time is precious. It's always precious, but I guess I'm realizing that, and I'm asked, like, does it serve me anymore? Are the things that I spend time in my life, do they serve me? And if I don't know, asking myself why am I doing this thing out of the 24 hours a day? Why am I spending even 5 minutes on this? And I think sometimes we, in our lives, we get so busy that I think sometimes our mental health too can be a reflection of us stopping and asking ourselves those questions. Not that you have to share it with anyone if you don't want to, if you're not ready for that. But so I do think sharing it is huge, and I think there's a freedom in the sharing, even though it can be so hard. But I love this. This is great. This helps everyone not only with their art, but their personal lives and things like that. So thank you.
Yeah. Oh, you're so welcome. And thank you for making a platform to talk through it with people. And I love what you just said, Nikki. That's such a great point. I'm often telling people that in my opinion, one of the most creative things that we can do in our lives is to question the premise. If I could make a capital Q and a capital P, question the premise of just anything that's going on. Why does this have to be the way that it is? James Baldwin said, the world is before you, and you need not take it or leave it as it was when you came in. And I think
Oh,
the most creative act is to decide is to think of the world in those terms. Okay, this is what it is, but this isn't inevitable. He also said, we made the world we're living in and we have to make it over. So anybody who's able to look out at the world, whether that's your own life, whether it's your family, whether it's your career, whether it's politics, whatever it might be, to be able to look out the world and say, this is how it is, but it need not be this way. And to imagine how it could be otherwise, that's such a creative question and such a beautiful prompt for any of us on any given day. And just probably, in my opinion, I wouldn't say probably, I would say that's the most creative act, is to realize that the world, nothing is as it must be. It is only the way that it is. And it takes creative people to be able to imagine something otherwise. And for me, that imagining otherwise destroyed and derailed my dream for a while, right? But then it also opened up another path. And for most of us on a daily basis, it doesn't have to be so derailing and so transformative, but it can be really beautiful to just let yourself be open to, okay, nothing is as it must be. Nothing that I've accepted, no path that I'm on is the path I must stay on. No practice that I have is the practice I must continue. I always have an opportunity to reimagine this.
It's
That's
beautiful.
wonderful. That is so beautiful. I love it. I'm feeling so enlightened and transformed. I think I'm going to re-listen to this as soon as we get off.
Oh, thank
Absolutely.
you.
It was so wonderful having you, Tasha. Thank you so much for sharing your time. And I just encourage everyone here to go check out her website and see this coaching, and just the resources are just, it's a gold mine there. So of just things how we can continue to take care of ourselves. Tasha, thank you for being here, and we hope to see you sometime.
Thank you so much, Nikki. Thank you, Heather. It's been really a
Yes.
pleasure.
Thank you.